There was a small, dusty antique shop at the edge of town, filled with relics of a forgotten time. Inside, the smell of old wood and mothballs mingled with the flicker of dim, yellowed lights. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with clouded eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, always seemed to be there, as if he never left. One chilly autumn afternoon, Emily, a college student with a taste for the unusual, wandered into the shop. She loved finding strange, old things, objects that told stories through their wear and age. As she browsed the shelves, a large, ornate mirror caught her eye. Its frame was dark wood, intricately carved with strange symbols that seemed to shift and twist the longer she looked at them. The glass itself was slightly cloudy, as if it had seen countless years pass. Emily was inexplicably drawn to it. She could almost hear a faint whisper in the back of her mind, urging her to take the mirror home. She approached the shopkeeper and asked about it. "Ah, the mirror," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "It has a long history. Many have owned it, but few have kept it for long." "Why not?" Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. "Some say it shows more than just a reflection," the old man replied, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure you want it?" Despite the shopkeeper's warning, Emily felt compelled to buy it. The mirror was expensive, but she didn't care. It felt like it was meant for her. Later that evening, she hung the mirror on the wall of her bedroom. The moment it was in place, the room felt colder, and the air seemed heavier. She stared at her reflection, and for a moment, she thought she saw something move behind her. But when she turned around, nothing was there. Over the next few days, Emily began to notice odd things about the mirror. At night, when she passed by it on her way to bed, she would catch glimpses of movement within its depths. Shadows that didn't belong to her would flicker across the glass, and sometimes she could have sworn she saw figures standing just out of sight, their forms hazy and indistinct. One night, after a particularly long day, Emily decided to confront whatever was lurking in the mirror. She sat in front of it, staring into the glass, trying to make sense of the shapes that seemed to shift and dance within. As she watched, the reflection of her bedroom seemed to fade, replaced by a dark, twisted version of the room. In this reflection, the walls were decayed, the paint peeling and cracked. The bed was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the windows were boarded up, as if the room had been abandoned for years. But what frightened her most was her reflection. It was still her, but different, pale, gaunt, and with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was matted and her lips were cracked and dry. As she stared, the reflection began to move on its own. It smiled, a twisted, cruel grin that sent a shiver down her spine. Then it spoke. "Come closer," it whispered, its voice raspy and broken, like a wind through dead leaves. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't look away. The reflection beckoned her closer, and she found herself leaning in, her face almost touching the glass. Suddenly, the reflection reached out of the mirror, its cold, bony hand grabbing her wrist. Emily screamed and tried to pull away, but its grip was too strong. The reflection's eyes were wide, wild with a mix of terror and malice, as if it were trapped in the glass and desperate to escape. With a sudden, violent jerk, the reflection yanked her forward, pulling her into the mirror. Emily's vision blurred, and she felt like she was falling, the world around her twisting and warping into a nightmarish landscape. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in the reflection's world, the decayed, abandoned version of her bedroom. She turned to look at the mirror and saw herself, but it wasn't her. The figure in the mirror was smiling, the same twisted grin, but now it was the reflection's world that looked normal, bright and clean. Panic set in as Emily realized she was trapped. She pounded on the glass, screaming for help, but no sound escaped her lips. The figure on the other side simply waved, turned, and walked away, leaving her alone in the dark, twisted version of her room. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time didn't seem to work the same way in this place. Emily wandered through the reflection's world, searching for a way out, but there was nothing. The only company she had were the other trapped souls, shadowy figures that drifted through the decayed landscape, their faces twisted in eternal agony. Back in the real world, the new Emily, her reflection, lived her life as if nothing had changed. But those who knew her began to notice subtle differences. She was colder, more distant, and there was something in her eyes that unsettled them. A darkness, a hunger that hadn't been there before. One by one, her friends started to avoid her, and soon, Emily was alone, just as the reflection had been before. But this new Emily didn't seem to mind. In fact, she seemed to revel in it, as if she had finally found what she had always been searching for. Months passed, and the mirror was eventually sold again, to another unsuspecting soul drawn in by its strange, dark allure. And so the cycle continued. The mirror remains out there, waiting for its next victim, its next prisoner. And if you ever find yourself staring into a reflection that doesn't quite seem like yours, be careful. You might be closer to the other side than you think.